There will be some, that's okay, thanks. At the end of the session, there will be some time for questions. If you have a question, please do raise your hand and someone will come with the microphone. And over to Gwen.
She mentioned I was the academic manager at the Hyderabad Teaching Centre, so for me it's very exciting to be back in Hyderabad, which is one of my favourite places. I spent 2.5 years here, and it's great to be back to be able to sort of impart my knowledge. As she mentioned, there will be time for questions at the end. Please do write them down. Please do get your questions in. Please do get as much out of me as you can. I think that's the most important part of this session, because there's a lot to talk about and there's absolutely no way on this planet that I can cover everything in my title. I spent a lot of time sort of bashing down my presentation because I thought I can't even touch upon this, I can't talk about that. There are so many things going on with assessing young learners that it's very difficult to put it into 40 minutes of talking. So that's a little warning to you that I'm not going to cover absolutely everything today, but I will talk to you largely and give you as good an overview as I can manage at this point of the challenges of assessing young learners, which are many, and the solutions, which are also possibly as long as my arm. So maybe I shot myself in the foot with that title. But what I'm going to look at today specifically is I'll talk you through a little bit of the background to the research, so where I'm coming from. And it's not just me, I'll talk to you about that in a second. And then the outline of our approach, what we decided to focus on and why, what we found out largely, and what I'm going to do is concentrate on each skill a little bit for you, so give you some information about the development of children in the areas of reading, writing, listening and speaking, and then things you need to consider when you're looking at testing them in these skills, and then some practical applications. You will see some examples of some tests, and I will talk you through the kind of things that you can do at that level and for that age group. The huge caveat here, obviously, I think there's a lot, but the largest one is obviously what I'm looking at is the ideal sort of the best level that a child can achieve in that particular age group. And of course, the variables that actually affect that performance are huge, as I'm sure you can attest. So literacy, for example, is a big one, education, knowledge, background, etc., etc. And there's no way that we can look at all of those individual things. So what I'm presenting to you is the ideal that they can achieve based on those considerations. So just bear that in mind. Some of it might seem a bit, oh, but I don't know if my students can do that. Possibly not. We have to be rough. And you'll sort of see that pattern emerging as I go through things. So, the biggest thing for me, I think, with assessing young learners, something that we seem to forget quite a lot, is that people continue to develop their language well into their 30s. And there seems to be some sort of general idea that you hit 17 or 18, and by that time, well, you can do anything. And people forget, I think, that actually you're still developing your language, you're still developing your competencies, you're still developing your world knowledge, well into your 30s. So actually trying to assess someone who is 15, 16, like they are an adult, is probably not a good idea. And yet we do it. We do it. We just, oh, well, you're sort of 14, 15. Yeah, well, just, you know, assess you like we do adults. That seems to happen. For me personally, and you'll see as we go through, that sort of age group 13 to 16 is my specialism, what I particularly look at. An age group which I feel is neglected in testing, that kind of approach that, well, you're nearly there, you're nearly an adult, so we'll just assess you that way. And they can't do it. You know, they can't actually perform in a similar way to adults in that kind of task. And for me, that means that we need to look at the tests and the tasks that we administer to this age group and to make sure that we are giving them the opportunity to be able to perform well in their tests so that they can demonstrate how good they are. And they won't perform quite in the same way as an adult will. And so for me, that means that we shouldn't necessarily assess them in the expectation of performance that we have of an adult, because that's not what they're going to do. This may, to some of you, not seem like rocket science, but you know, to me, this is something that is missed quite a lot. And you'll see there's a little picture on there, and that picture is that's Angela Hasselgreen, who has worked with me on this project and is a humongous contributor and an absolute star in terms of language testing. Her specialism is younger learners. So what we did is collaborated together and looked at, and I just don't want her to be forgotten, you can see what she looks like. But what we looked at in order to see what is the best way, or attempt to start to hash out really what's the best way to assess young learners, we looked at L1 language development, we looked at cognitive and social development, we looked at L2 competence then, and we also looked at the CFR. And we took all those things together, and school curricula and research into possible levels of attainment in Europe, for example, and America. So we had a good look at everything we possibly had available to try and start spotting trends, challenges, possible solutions, the best way to go about it. Okay. The two things that are in green are the ones that I'm going to try and focus on a little bit today. So I'm going to look largely at cognitive and social development and how that affects the tasks that you would develop to assess young learners. So the challenges within that. I'm going to touch very briefly upon, as I said, I've just been hammering down this presentation because there's so much to say. Very briefly upon L1 development, just to give you some ideas and make you think about what happens at these stages, what is possible, and what you really need to think about. That I think sometimes we really have quite high expectations for young learners in their language, and maybe we should start making sure that our expectations match what they actually can do. So we'll take a look at that, and I'll discuss as well, as I said, through the skills, we'll have a little look at the kind of things that we could administer to test that kind of thing. So, When we started to look at this, we went right back to the beginning. We went to a good old favourite, which would be Piaget's thoughts on the 4 stages of development in the child and child psychology. So we're looking here at the 4 stages of development, starting with sensory motor, which is just looking at kicking and repetitive movements, that kind of thing. At obviously a very, very 0 to 2, very, very low age, I wouldn't recommend testing that age range. Then pre-operational, 2 to 7, where they still have a very limited attention span. There's a lot of egocentrism going on. They concentrate on themselves, but they're not too worried about others at that stage, which is fair enough. Concrete operational, so here they start a little bit with logical thinking, increased in attention span, and finally 11-12 is when they move to the formal operational period, where they start thinking a little bit more logically and systematically, and they have more abstract, they can deal with more abstract items. However, you can see I've got a big but in the corner. There's been a lot of criticism of Piaget's work, actually some of the ways that the research was conducted, and the fact that, as you'll notice here, it stops at 12. And as I mentioned earlier, we develop a lot longer than just 12, and there are other things to consider. So, we looked further than just Piaget's work. We had a look at Nippold's work, which I have to say, if you have the time, do read Nippold's book. It's Marilyn Nippold on the development of adolescents and children, where she looks at everything, and I'll give you a little summary, but honestly, I'm really touching the tiniest part of it. If you want to read an accessible book on young learner development, and do read that. So here we're looking at, and you will see throughout my presentation that we've got up to. We cannot, unfortunately, with children say at 8, you do this, at 9, you do this, at 10, you do this, and at 11, you do this. It would be wonderful if we could, but people develop at different rates, yes. People mature at different ages, and this is absolutely one of those challenges with assessing young learners, is that they're not always at exactly the same stage. Yeah. So that's a prime thing that you have to think about when you're looking at teaching and assessing them, okay? So here I've sort of grouped together the main things in terms of cognitive and social development, which goes beyond Piaget's initial work. So we're looking at sort of up to about 8 or 9. They still have limited short-term memory and attention span. It's very difficult for them to do tasks which involve more than one thing that they have to do. So do be careful. That's one sort of main consideration. Do be careful when you're planning tasks for that age range to make sure that you stick to one thing and one thing only, because it's more difficult for them to deal with possibly listening and writing something and trying to plan something else. Yeah, so listen only, or write only, or plan only would be the thing that I would say there. And they still have a great need for fun and fantasy. Yeah, I mentioned Angela earlier, and I think one of the most amazing things that Angela has done is she's developed a test for young learners around this age, actually, where she's managed to tap into this need for fun and fantasy. It's called The Case of the Lost Elephant, where every task that you do is working towards solving this mystery of the lost elephant. So they might have a writing task, and then they have to do a reading task to find out something, and then they have to speak about it and report on it. And so they are being tested on their language skills. Without realizing it, they're engaged and involved because there's that sense of fantasy. And the only problem with that test is that the children were so involved in it that they cried when they had to give the book back. So this, for me, is just an absolutely humongous exemplar of the best way to develop a test for children, where they're just so engaged and so involved in it that they really want to do it, because young learners, motivation is a key consideration. Yeah. Still, I think also something which is key is up to 12, 13. You're going to see blurred lines throughout this presentation. That their recall and processing increases rapidly. They can start organising concepts into categories and hierarchical things, slightly more like adults, which means that obviously up to 9 they can't quite yet, which is, I think, a major consideration. And they start to sort of become less dependent on adults. They move away from that. By the time they hit 17, they'd rather not talk to adults. I think any of you who've had teenagers will know this very well, that they would rather talk to their peers than they would adults. And for me, this means that we have to be quite careful with the speaking tests. We have to think about it. Do we want to put them in front of an adult interlocutor? Do we want to give them that added sort of scary feature? Or is it better or okay to have them talking to their friends? Would that produce more language from them? Would they be participating better in the task and therefore allow us to assess them more properly, or more properly? That's weird. Better, yes. Can we access their language? Because it's about accessing the language that the young learners have, which sometimes they're not so keen on sharing with us. Yes. So we have to find ways to get them to share their knowledge and their language with us. And that's one of the prime considerations, I think, in assessing young learners. So you've got my little star there at the bottom. Not, as I mentioned earlier, not everyone develops at the same rate. So I'm going to touch briefly here, as I mentioned, on L1 development. Goodness me, I need to rush. I've just seen the time. This is an absolute teeny-tiny snapshot of the type of thing I'm talking about. And I've put this up in particular to try and stress what goes on with children, and the fact that we are still learning, even as teenagers, and that we can't expect teenagers even to be producing really abstract nouns or fully understand them. Something that really hit me actually when I read Nippold's book was that adolescents still struggle to fully understand all aspects and all uses and all meanings of abstract nouns. And we cannot expect them to. Sometimes they don't get it well into their 30s. So even something simple, for example, like you say to them, oh, they were 9th on the scoreboard, they went up 5 places, and they will say, oh, they were 14th, right? Instead of going the other way around. They haven't grasped that extra meaning, those other things that go on with that particular particle. They haven't got it yet. So for me, that means we shouldn't be testing that. Yeah? And it means, and researchers, a lot of the researchers mentioned in this, that we should be focusing on it more in the classroom, because we do test on it. It is there in school curricula around the world. We test these abstract nouns, we expect them to know it, but we don't actually explicitly teach that. So it's definitely something that's come out of this, is that we should focus a little bit more on some of these abstract nouns and meta language, because we do test on it and yet we never actually tell them what it is. I had a little focus as well on conversation and narration, just to give you an idea. If you're looking at speaking tests, for example, we expect them to do a lot of things, and yet you go, oh, why didn't they manage to do that very well? Because they still can't. You know, as I've highlighted previously, adolescents are more comfortable talking with their peers about things, so we then just put them in front of an adult and go, oh, why didn't they talk very well about that? So we need to think about that kind of thing, yeah. But still, my key message here, and this is the tiny bit, but there's a huge amount to look at here. But the trend is that even adolescents cannot manage what adults can. Yeah. So at the bottom, conversational coherence gradually increases with age, in particular as they approach adulthood, and that means that we can't expect them to give a full, perfect performance, and we need to then look at the elements that we're going to assess within that, and how we're going to and what we're going to concentrate on, and maybe change our expectations a little bit of adolescent performance. Right. So now I'm watching time because I'm very aware that I'm waffling. I could waffle about this for hours on end. So here we're just going to touch on reading and give you some ideas of how their reading ability develops, and this is all based on everything that we look at that I haven't had time to go into detail on. So looking at L1 development, L2 acquisition, comparing it to the CFR, all those things. So up to about 9, they can still only really deal with short texts. For the very low-level learners, you're better off testing cognate, for example. All right, there's not a lot that goes beyond word recognition, for example. I see a lot of tests where we subject young learners to really long readings, and we have to be careful with that, I think, and make sure that if we're making them read something that long, that we're getting something useful out of them, and maybe accept that they can't actually read that. You also, I think, people sort of forget, they think, oh, well, to try a high-level reading, for example, I'll just make them read this long, complicated thing. You can test reading without it being very long. And in fact, I've seen some very good high-level reading tasks which are actually quite short, but particularly difficult to complete. And here I've got some examples of some lower level. So here we've got word recognition. So they have to match the word to the picture. So that's lower level. Here we've got still in the 8 to 9 age range, where you have a party invitation and your questions might be, what time is the party, where is the party, who's going? Yeah? So they have to read the whole thing. You'll notice that these things are quite colourful, that pictures are involved, which is obviously a common trait in looking at young learners, but none of these are superfluous. And I think that is something possibly that is really worth considering, because sometimes in testing, if you have pictures, but they're not there for a reason, then they actually might distract from the task rather than help people. So that's something that you have to think about, is making sure that your pictures are useful. And this is a higher level. This one here, they really have to read the whole thing and understand it to choose the correct picture. There's a lot going on here. We're talking about words, small pieces, etc., etc. They can't get it right unless they've understood the full text. And again, this isn't particularly long, and it doesn't have to be. Yeah, if you're testing reading and understanding, it doesn't have to be a massive, massive text. Yeah, I might bang on about that a bit too much, but anyway, there's some examples for you. Okay, looking at writing. Again, we have to really think about our expectations with writing and what they can do. So sort of even up to 9 years old, we're still looking at simple sentences, simple coherent sentences. They might be able to do a gap fill, and that's still testing writing if they have to read the whole thing and get it right. They might produce a series of simple sentences. Some things that you will notice, and I have noticed, especially with young learners, which is a bit of a challenge, is that they like to talk in lists and they like to write in lists. And that can be problematic to assess, definitely. So think about the support that you give them, I would say. For example, I recently developed a test for teenagers, and something that I found initially with the tasks that we were administering was that they had to look at a picture and describe it and talk about it, and they wouldn't get round to answering the follow-up questions because they would just get so involved in the picture and the detail. And they'd be like, there are 3 cows and 2 lambs and 5 blades of grass and blah, 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 blah. Yeah, so, and then they forget everything else that they have to do. So make sure that your support material is really supporting and not distracting. Don't give them that opportunity to write in lists or speak in lists, because they will do it. And you'll notice often in their writing, and I did this, and I went there, and I did that, and I saw this, and I, yeah. Because they're still focusing on themselves when they're younger, which is completely fine. But then make sure that you're looking at how you assess that and what you're going to do with that if that's the kind of response that you get. So even up to 13, still looking at them having, a slightly wider knowledge of the world, but they just don't ever have that life experience like adults do. And I think that's something which is key. Same with up to 17. It still needs to be a little bit more concrete than you would do with adults. Yeah? That for me is one of the main considerations. They cannot support themselves in a test just yet. They do not have that life experience to be able to push themselves to talk or push themselves to continue writing, because they still don't quite understand that that's important. They know it's a test. They know it means a lot in their lives, but they still haven't quite made that link where they can go, I don't really know the answer to that question, but I'll talk about something related instead, which is what an adult would do. Teenagers, for example, don't do that. Yeah. Okay, just watching time. I'll skip that bit. So speaking here, I'm looking specifically, it's a bit small, I'm afraid, so I'll just go through it rather quickly. Here I'm looking at the CFR because I think what their ability is actually fairly linked to it in terms of age range. And this is something that Angela and I looked at in our research, was specifically taking into sort of consideration all the huge amount of stuff that we looked at earlier. What does that mean? Because the CFR is used for adults, it was developed for adults, it's used to measure or to help measure language, and yet it's used on young learners to measure language, and it wasn't developed for them, right? So what can they realistically do, taking into account everything that I spoke about earlier? What can they do? So if you're looking at sort of up to 8, 9, they might get to sort of A2, possibly here in India, they might reach that B1 stage, yeah? So they've got enough language to get by on familiar topics. Familiar topics, I think, is key here, yeah? Be very careful about what you're testing them on. Give them support at every stage, and support does not mean support doesn't mean lengthy instructions. I think I remember you from my session yesterday. I think I talked about lengthy instructions at length yesterday. Be careful that the support that you give them is targeted to that production. Okay, right? Everyone's you will be able to access a PPT after, right? Okay. Yeah. And then just sort of going through the age ranges, 17-year-olds, and this, I think, is another thing, 17-year-olds will reach sort of that B2, C1 level, that kind of language competence, and can be extremely fluent. But they will still have some issues in what they are talking about. They will still talk in circles because they still don't have that either language development or, oh my goodness me, 10 minutes to go. And I want time for questions. But I think you can see the theme here. Yes, they can achieve the highest level of proficiency, but no, they cannot quite do it yet as an adult. So you need to make sure that you are A, taking that into consideration, and B, assessing them in a way that supports them to be able to demonstrate how good they are, but that doesn't sort of catch them when they're trying to do something and stop them from producing that fantastic language. And bear in mind that they do get repetitive, that it is, they do spend their time in speaking, go, it's really, really, really cold, it's really, really, really great, it's really, really, really fantastic. And they don't use necessarily those extreme adjectives. They know them, they might know absolutely, they might know all of these things, but they will not use them. But it doesn't mean that they're deficient in it, if you see what I mean. Okay, so we've only got 10 minutes left. So here is a summary that Angela and I put together at the end. I should tell you, actually I failed to mention this, but all of this research, all of these things that I've touched upon are going to be available in a short book. So we'll be publishing this monograph around November, I think, where you'll be able to have a good look at what I've talked about, and also a lot more examples of what you can, can't do. We've tried to make it practical for teachers. I think sometimes language testers are seen as sitting in an ivory tower, just saying, oh, do it this way, that way. But we really want to help teachers in the classroom assess. So this is just a very brief summary, and couldn't even get it on the slide. That took about 30 minutes trying to do so. And instead of talking you through it, since we've only got 10 minutes left, I will now open up for some questions.
Any samples of question papers or assessment papers you have?
There's a lot, actually. There's a lot. I touched on a few of them. For 17 years, I would look at Aptis for Teens, which I developed for sort of 13 to 17 age group. And we spent a lot of time looking at how to access their language and giving them tasks that supports them to do that. So do have a look at Aptis for Teens, because there's a lot of sample tasks that you can take away from that, which we know work. We've tried it in lots of different ways. I can tell you they work. And they still find challenging, but it gets what you need to get out of them, which is really good. And it spans a range of levels as well. So you can look at something which is maybe lower level all the way up to higher level proficiency. So that will give you some different tasks.
Challenges and how we assess the learners, isn't it?
Yes.
Can we get possible solutions?
The solutions are, I think this lady, before we started talking, really hit it on the head for me, is that the challenges are many and varied, and also dependent on context. So if you have a specific challenge that you would like to ask me about, I'm happy to help you with that. But I think largely, for me, particularly in this presentation, and something that we really need to think about, is the fact that the main challenge is, at the moment, that we try and assess young learners like we do adults, and just trying to think about how you will adapt your tasks and what you do with them to your particular context.
They don't have any background, grassroots. So,
I would like to know that, who are you talking?
yeah, I'm talking. See, we have students whose grassroots levels are very low. So actually, I came to this session that you would suggest some possible. At least if you suggest some successful tasks.
I think I touched upon some earlier when you're looking at reading, and I think this is something which is not just reading but goes across all skills, is a lower level. You're talking about really low level students. So matching, word recognition, matching, even in listening, you might be asking them how much did they spend on their auto ride, and it'll be 100, 150 rupees, 200 rupees. That's the option. But you make sure in the listening that they only say 100 rupees, that they don't, because for higher level, you can mention lots of different numbers and they can be in the distractors and you change how it goes, yeah? So if you're talking about really low level students, then expect them to be matching. Don't expect them to go a lot further than answering sentence level questions, for example.
Simple to complex.
Yeah, exactly. And essential with young learners, I think I bashed on about this yesterday, but essential with young learners is that no matter what level they are, no matter what you're assessing, that motivation is key, and you really need to start, no matter what, with your test, with some simple questions that they will be able to answer, yeah? Because that will then make them confident to continue. That will make them want to carry on with the test. It's not, an adult knows they need to take a test and they know why, but young learners need that extra motivation. You need to tap into that, definitely.
I don't know if I missed your point, but you spoke of the CFR being for adults.
Yes.
Therefore, how have you extrapolated it for the young learners?
Well, what we've done, and that's sort of the larger thing in this whole project, and I'm glad you asked that because I tried not so much to touch upon the CFR for this audience, but what we've done is looked at the realistic, having a look at their L1 development, L2 acquisition, etc., cognitive and social development, look at the realistic levels of attainment in relation to the CFR. So extrapolating, as you've correctly identified, those bits which they can do. So often when you're looking at B2 level, for example, they might say, oh, they can write a business email about this, they can do that. They can't do that. They've never been in the work context, obviously, right? So that's something that goes out of the window, but focusing on the descriptors within that section that we know they are capable of doing in relation to their age range. So that's what we did. And that is also discussed quite clearly in our monograph, and it's a huge product of what we're aiming for.
Good morning.
Could we just wait for the microphone to come to you so that everyone can hear your question, please?
Good morning, Gwen.
Good morning.
I am dealing, I'm a teacher of in a private school from Kolkata, and I'm dealing with very young learners. I mean, they're in the age group and 5 and 6.
Yeah.
And so they fall under the young learners only.
Only just, yeah. 5, 6, yeah.
Yeah. Could you suggest, could you focus on how I could develop their reading skill? I'm trying to develop their reading skill because they're very poor in reading. And, you know, if you ask them to read even single words, it's like PAT pad this way. So I am trying to develop the reading skill without, you know, pronouncing, spelling them out, spelling out the words. So could you just focus on that a bit?
But it's okay, I think, if you spell out the words, if you give that kind of support. I think that's absolutely fine, yeah. Mm-hmm. I'm going to refer back to Nippold, which I spoke about quite a lot. If you look at, she discusses literacy in there, obviously, and derivational morphology, for example, and how students start to develop their literacy rates and how it speeds up based on that derivational morphology. So I would recommend looking at that, looking at the building blocks when you're trying to teach them reading. And I certainly appreciate that it's definitely difficult at that age. But again, it's expectations, yeah. I think it's okay for you to get them to sort of spell out things. That's fine because you're helping them mentally make those links between the letters and the sounds, and that's really important. So it's great that you're doing it that way.
Thank you.
I have one of the students. She's not able to write correct spellings. She knows the word, but she's not able to write the correct spelling of that particular word. So how can I help her?
Right, okay. That's a difficult question. Have you considered that your student potentially needs additional support? Because that if she can say it, but she can't spell it, is it possible that she has dyslexia? Have you considered dyslexia or dysgraphia and looking into that? And how you might be able to support your student that way?
Okay, but how to overcome through that?
Well, it's almost like how long is a piece of string, really, that question. You have to sit with them and work out what works for them. Yeah? There is no one answer to this question. I would love to be able to give you a really simple solution, but you have to talk to them about how the words and the letters connect to them and find ways of recall that will help them. And maybe looking even at NLP sometimes really helps students who have dyslexia. So trying out some different methods until you find the way that works. I'm afraid it's not one simple solution for that.
Hello, good morning.
Hi.
There's a child in my class who has dyslexia as well as dysgraphia.
I think the two of you need to talk.
So what exactly I can adapt so that the child can be successful in his coming years?
It really, really depends. You
He's
have
diagnosed
to speak
with the dyslexia and the dysgraphia.
And that's great that you've acknowledged it, but you also, every child is an individual, every person learns in a different way. So you need to spend some time with them. I can't answer that, I've never met your students. So you have to spend some time with them and work out what clicks with them. You know, I have a good friend who is severely dyslexic, and he can only learn one new thing that he applies in his writing every 2 weeks, you know, and he's very excited when he manages to do that. And I'm talking about an adult, yeah? So this does continue into adulthood as well. So it's about, and it's taken him a long time to work out the best way to remember things and remember spelling and stuff like that. So you need to work with that student, as I said to this gentleman here, and try and find the best ways of recall for them and what works, what clicks with them to help them remember how to do it. Because we can't, I mean, something that really strikes me with dyslexia and dysgraphia is that we just cannot 100% understand how it is for them, yeah? They sometimes look at a page, and this is not everybody because it's always different for every student, but they can look at a page and the words are moving, you know? Which is why they change it around when they're writing, because it's just a sort of moving sea. So how do you even get them to concentrate on writing, you know, reading, sorry, that's a very difficult thing to do as well. And we don't think about that. Sometimes the issue is because it's literally moving on the page for them.
Will drill work and repetition of the work help them?
It can do. You have to try it, yeah? Try it, see if that works. If not, try something else until you get there. It's not a simple process. But I'm very glad that you're going to try and help them with that, because it's very important.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I'm teaching to a student of class 9 and 10.
Okay.
And my students feel difficulty in remembering difficult words, vocabulary, and even sometimes they're not able to express in a proper way. They repeat many times the same meaning.
And what would you like them to do?
I want them to construct the meaning very carefully and then avoid repetitions.
Right, okay. So what you really need to do is give them context, okay? Something with young learners which is absolutely key and we sometimes forget about is that they need context, and that support that I was talking about earlier. So maybe try and expand the use of those words that you are targeting and get them maybe to do some exercises where they're using that word in different sentences, different contexts, and then you give them a speaking task where they have to talk about it and they have to use those words, and you can double check that they've fully understood it, yeah? But do be careful that, I hope these words are not those abstract nouns that I was talking about, which are very difficult for teenagers to remember, yeah? So make sure, try and understand what their difficulty is with it. Why are they having problems in the first place? Because sometimes repetition isn't always the best way to go. Yeah? If they can't repeat it, then it means they really haven't fully understood the concept. So go back to explaining what that word means and giving them an opportunity to use it. Yeah? Time, always my enemy.
Hi. Gwen, can you tell me if you have a view on when to administer assessments? Is it something you believe should be continuous, or do you think it should be at the end of a term? I mean, yeah.
That's a very good question, and we have a horrible habit of over-testing young learners, I think, and just sort of strong-arming them into doing these things that might not necessarily be valuable. There is no rule, unfortunately, on when you should test, but I think that you always should look at your curriculum, your syllabus, look at those learning blocks, and the stages within your system that are appropriate to assess. So if you're assessing once a month, personally, I would say you might be over-egging the cake there, but it depends. Making sure that they've got a full unit or a full topic that you're assessing sort of holistically there, that'd be great. But it depends what you also mean. Here we go. It depends. It depends what you mean by assessment. Are you looking at a formal assessment? Are you looking at sort of an end of term type thing? Or are you looking at just a quick quiz that you do just to double check that they actually listened when you taught them yesterday? Because that also happens and you need to do it. Yes, it depends. But if you're looking at slightly more formal assessment, I recently worked with a ministry where we had to revamp their assessments because there was too much testing going on, and then that essentially means that there's not a lot of learning, right? So focus on the learning that happens before you test them on it. That would be my recommendation. Yes?
Now in most of the schools we have this continuous comprehensive evaluation, the CC, and and almost, it is also advisable that we have a formative assessment, which is to improve the learning. It is for learning, not the summative, which is of learning. So what do you suggest on the formative assessment? How often should it be done? And what would be the main objective of doing it?
Oh, goodness. That's a rather large question that I probably could only answer with one of your ministers of education present, I would say. But, as I just said, I think that you need to be careful in how much you test and whether it does really link into that learning. So when you build your curriculum, when you build your system, that is when you have to think about testing. Often people don't. So your curriculum is built and it's like, oh my God, we need to check that they've done something. And so then you start shoving in quite a few tests which might not be that necessary. I would think that twice a year would be sufficient. Yeah, for that kind of official assessment. Yeah, but you say that's too long because we're used to administering them that quick. But it depends. If you're also doing continuous assessment, sit down and think about how many tests your students take. How many do they take?
Every 2 months, I think.
Every 2 months, right?
Every 2 months.
It's quite a lot for in a year.
Testing, hardly learning.
Exactly. All right, and that's my point. If you feel they're only testing and hardly learning, then you might need to look at that. Yeah.
No, actually this testing is for learning. It's not testing of the learning, but how to help the children to learn. So how often, is it advisable to have these kind of testing to identify what the children are lacking in, like
but
which
it
concepts?
Depends. It depends. I would say right at the beginning is a really good time to test. So right at the beginning of the year, because if you want to identify what they are lacking, then do it at the beginning. And then you can do a diagnostic test and see where their weaknesses are and work towards improving that. It's too late if you do that kind of thing at the end of the year, right? You've lost your chance to do something about it. Sure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Gwen, for your talk. And that kind of
please talk to me. Please, you don't have to talk to me right now in the room, but please talk to me. I'm here all day, so do approach me afterwards. Thank you very much. Thank you.